Hi, everybody. Very warm greetings to you all. My name is Lori Michau, and I work with Raising Voices, and I just want to thank Nicola and everyone there who really welcomed me and invited me to speak at this important event. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, and I hope that this piece on this recording will be okay, and I hope to give you a little bit of a sense, but I really appreciate the invitation, and I hope that it will contribute to a really wonderful day. The schedule that you had on looks very engaging, and certainly many, many ideas circulating in New Zealand that the whole rest of us can also learn from. So I really appreciate being included in this event. So I've been asked today to speak about some of our work in Kampala around mobilizing communities to prevent partner violence. And I'm going to share a little bit about the approach, as you've actually already watched the film, so that's really great. So I don't have to start from scratch there. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the approach, how we did the approach in Kampala, as well as a little bit around the study. We did a large-scale study around it, and then some learnings, and that's really where I hope to focus. The approach and how we did it in Kampala and the study itself can be read in other places. But one of the things that we're trying to do more of at Raising Voices is to try to communicate some of the learning so that other activists and other practitioners like yourselves and like many of us here who are really struggling and trying to be very deliberate and conscious about the learning that we're doing as we do this community mobilization work. So that's where I hope to spend kind of more of my time, and I hope that it will be useful to all of you. So just a little bit about SASA. It is a community mobilization approach. It's a large-scale approach that really tries to change social norms, so not just working at the individual level, but really across the community level to really change the perceptions and attitudes and behaviors, very importantly, of people across the community. So not just people who've had interaction with SASA itself, but across the community, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what it means. But that's what it looks like. It is not a small thing. It's a rather bulky, large kit, but was developed so that for years we really struggled as an organization to not only think through theoretically what long-term programming looks like, but also then the everyday, very practical materials and ideas and processes that you need along the way to stay on track and in focus. And so we try to really just put it all in there with SASA. It's not a blueprint, it's really a kit. So people take and choose what they will. There are key components, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, but which you saw in the film as well. So here's how it works. There are 4 phases, and the 4 phases are an important piece of the core of the SASA approach. And this is quite simple, actually. It's just based on the trans-theoretical model of change, which is a very common model within public health that is used to understand and facilitate individual change, from people not being aware of a problem to becoming aware of a problem, to feeling like they should do something and garnering kind of ideas and support for that, and then actually making change and maintaining that change. So what we've just done is scale that up to the community level. And so we start with START. And this part really is where we learn about the community. So not jumping in and doing programming right from the beginning, but really spending time to learn about the community, to build relationships. And very important, at least, to select people who really are committed and who have this idea, even if they might not be able to articulate it, they have a feeling for it, for this work and for the issue of violence against women. As you'll see within SASA, what we do is we don't focus just and use the language of violence against women or even gender or even women's rights, which is what we actually did for quite a long time. But with SASA, we changed it to the language of power. We felt like, and it might be very different in New Zealand, but we were finding that some of those concepts around rights, gender, they were barriers to people, and they weren't helping people come close to the issue. And it also sounded very sort of NGO-ish and NGO-icized. And so we really wanted to try to get beyond basic information for people and to people to be processing it in their heads to really starting to feel this. And so we used, and we didn't make this up either, there's a very common theoretical frame around four types of power, and that's what we use across the four phases of SASA. So first start with fostering the power within ourselves as staff, so recognizing that, we're not doing this work for communities out there. We're actually doing the work also ourselves in collaboration and in solidarity with communities. And so that means we have to also engage and address these issues within our own lives. And so really trying to help people feel like they have a sense of agency and can tap into their own existing power and potential power to really start to become active around important issues in the community. And then we jump to the awareness phase, and this is where we really try to, community activists start going out into the community to engage others. So this could mean from a whole range of activities that I'll talk about, but it's not kind of big, formal, very, big events. It's very small, informal, person-to-person activism that is really the heart and soul of SASA. So really we ask people to think about their own communities and their own social networks, and then try to tap those and figure out how can I start engaging with the people closest to me, because we all listen to the people closest to us more than some external folks and experts and other people who don't have a close window into our lives. And so the awareness phase is really helping activists gain confidence through doing small informal activities with folks. And the idea here is not to message around violence, it's not to message around power either, it's really to encourage critical thinking. So the idea here is to really help people unpack this idea of men's power over women and what that means in their own lives. Yeah, so making it very present and not kind of something out there that happens to other people, but something that happens to all of us, like how we use our power, if we use our power positively, or if we are using our power negatively, and and who we use it with differently. So really trying to help people with critical reflection and analysis around their own situation and their own lives. And then recognizing that once people start to identify, hey, this is something that could be an issue in my life and in the lives of other women and men in my community, then, we can't just jump to action. And I think that many public health programs have learned this, but the importance of a support phase. And a support phase, by what we mean by that, is not necessarily services, which are also very important, but also very, very important is to help people feel like they're connected to each other and they're not the only ones thinking things. This is a critical aspect in social norm change because we want people to be able to say, okay, like this is an important issue and I feel it, but I also am hearing it from my pastor or my imam, or I'm also hearing it from the woman that I buy chapatis from on the corner, and I hear it on the radio, and I see posters around it, and when I'm drinking tea at the tea shop, I see this mural around it. So there's a whole kind of influx of different ideas, and that kind of builds a confidence and a cohesion within the community where people feel safer to start acting on and speaking about some of these very personal and sensitive issues. So really trying to build social cohesion between people in the community around the support phase, as well as really helping people with practical skills. It's another very common challenge within public health work and all sorts of work, I think, that we think, okay, awareness equals action. Yeah, but really there are some skills that people need to be able to make some of these positive changes around communication skills, around self-advocacy, right, around building connections with other people, around even how to stay safe as an individual or how to intervene as well. And so all of those kind of issues are discussed within the support phase. And then action. Yeah, so people do want to do something, and yet really celebrating things and celebrating the small. You know, a lot of times what we have found in violence prevention, and it's really in the micro moments where real important change happens, that it's not kind of some big glorious thing that you know, we even notice sometimes, but it's in those small moments that we interactions and our relationships with other people where power shifts and we start being kind of different and people start being different. And that is a really important piece for action and helping people feel like they actually do have power to make positive change in their own lives. And I think especially in resource-poor settings where many of our communities are, and I know that there's communities like that in New Zealand as well, that often you don't feel like there's many options and opportunities to actually make a real difference. And so trying to actually recognize that we could, and I could as an individual, do something quite different. And so trying again to, across all the phases, to really involve a whole cross-section of community members from leaders and institutions to not just work with small groups here and there, but to build a critical mass. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So as you can see, there's three main components. The process, so really phasing ideas in systematically and having that be led by community members. So not just kind of jumping in with activities around action and supporting each other and, oh, awareness. No, but really trying to be systematic because this is a big change, yeah, and this is a very sensitive change. And so the more that we can be careful around phasing processes and ideas in, we can be much more effective. And again, led by community members, not by external folks or even folks that are seen as experts, but just our friends and neighbors and the people closest to us, which goes out to reach. Yeah, so trying to reach critical mass across all the sectors, from the individual level to the interpersonal level to the community level to societal level. So the more people hear about these ideas from different sources, the more they will really be able to take it to heart and to really try to do something different in their own lives, and intensely. So we know that one-off activities don't really work. We know that kind of dropping into communities, doing a smattering of things and coming back maybe never, or coming back 6 months later, doesn't really help, and it actually can do some harm. And so really trying to be systematic around our engagement with communities. And then content. Yeah, that the content of power for us has been extremely transformative, that it really, our violence against women work for many years kind of was really, we found it very hard to break the barrier to reach out to men and really get them involved because it was always kind of marginalized as a women's issue. And so the language of power really helped bring in close. And again, especially in resource-poor communities where men are, in the communities where we work, have a very intense connection to feeling powerless. And I think that connection of feeling powerless, that they can't provide school fees for their children, or they don't have formal employment or a job, also, and they don't have, you know, enough education, all of those things really leave a person feeling quite powerless. And so men really connect to this, and it then makes the issue to be about men and women and us as people rather than this kind of marginal women's issue. So it really gets personal with people, and it decreases defensiveness. And then women also we have found feel safer. They don't have to feel like, okay, you know, I'm going to be put on the spot on this program, and it's always going to be about, you know, the spotlight is always on women. What we're talking about here is around power and how we're using it. And of course, the analysis around violence against women is that men have power over women, but we don't start there and we don't stop there. So it's a much more nuanced and complex discussion that we're trying to have in communities. So those are the three critical components. So in the kit, things come and go, but these things are what makes it, and as well as some other things that I'll talk about, it really makes it SASA, and that we have found to be really critical in terms of effective violence prevention. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about SASA in action. You saw some of it in the film that you saw, and I'm just going to share a little bit more. This is Herbert. He's one of our community activists, and he's great. He's amazing. He just goes door to door. He does all sorts of things. He lives right, actually a few doors down from this picture, and you'll see from some of the activities they're very, very accessible. And so he just kind of goes about and does SASA activities within his normal kind of everyday life. So Kampala, we are in a very densely populated, very urban environment. As you can see, here's a photo of just a nearby intersection. It's not a quiet and calm place most of the time. It's very busy. There is a lot happening. The informal sector is very intense and busy. And so this is where most people make their money, whether, selling matoke, as you can see in the truck, which is the green bananas, going to market, doing boda-bodas, which are the motorcycle taxis. There's a whole very complex informal economy, but it does mean that there is a serious lack of infrastructure, lack of support services, power, electricity, water, sanitation. It's all pretty much very minimal and weak, and so people do live in very challenging conditions. And another interesting thing about Kampala is because everybody comes in from rural areas thinking, I'm going to make it in Kampala and there's going to be work. In Kampala, there are many, many ethnicities in Kampala, and so this is quite different than some of the other communities where we do SASA, where it's a very cohesive rural community where everybody's known each other for the last, families have known each other for generations. Kampala is quite different than that, and that poses unique, actually, questions and challenges to community organizing when there isn't that social cohesion existing within communities. And there's very many languages. So in Kampala, there English as well as Luganda are spoken, in Luganda more so in communities, but there are also very many other languages because people come from all over. There's 7 main languages in Uganda, but more than like 50 kind of dialects, but there's 7 sort of official languages. And so that also creates quite unique challenges where it could be hard to organize if you're organizing large-scale things, but when you're doing small-scale community organizing, people tap into people that they know, and they usually know people who are in their own social network and speak similar languages to them. So in Kampala, we worked with over 400 activists, and these are just regular people. They're not kind of highly educated. Some are not educated at all. Some are very low literate. Some might be completely illiterate. Well, others might have a secondary school education, for example. Local government officials, cultural leaders, sengas, which cultural leaders in our region are very, very important. So whether that means a chief or other kind of traditional leaders. Sengas are one of those kind of traditional leaders. They are marriage counselors, and so people with, they do before marriage, and when marriages are kind of in trouble, they will do counseling to women and to men to help them kind of overcome some of their challenges. So they're sanctioned by the community and culturally. And what we do is try to work within them and through them and with them, help kind of transform some of what might not be very kind of woman-friendly or gender-sensitive kind of counseling that they do into more rights-based counseling and discussions with women and men. And that's been a very, very powerful tool for us in Kampala. We also work with police, healthcare workers, there's drama, there's youth groups, there's a whole bunch of groups. And the idea is to not work just with a few small groups here and there, but really try to go big and work across the ecological model. So over the years, they did over 11,000 activities. These can be very small activities, from community conversations to door-to-door discussions where I just knock on my neighbor's door and see how they are and have a little chat. trainings, public events. We do some big events, not very many, but some. Poster discussions, community meetings, film shows, so men, mostly men, but sometimes women too, go to these little kind of informal movie theaters, which are basically just little shelters, really, that have a little generator or some power, and they project on a larger screen, but still quite small, film shows. And so we do a lot of that, and it's a really good way of reaching men. And then soap opera discussion groups and all sorts of activities, again, from SASA, but some we use more in Kampala and some we use less of, just because of the context and what communities like in Kampala. And we reached more than 260,000 community members in the parishes, which are neighborhoods where we work in Kampala. So and this is only exposure that kind of we know and can kind of count. And we believe it's quite beyond that, because the idea within SASA is that we aren't actually branding. We aren't kind of trying to push SASA and push the brand and have everybody always identify as SASA, but actually just this is a part of their life and a part of the work that they do in their own communities. And so through the qualitative data, actually, we found that many people said, no, I don't know SASA, or I haven't been exposed to SASA. But then when in the qualitative data, we kind of followed it back, their neighbor was a community activist, or they were counseled by a Sangha who is a SASA Sangha, but, it just becomes part of people, which is the idea, so that it's integrated into real life and not a project, because projects, politically and kind of practically belong to usually a group and not a community. And so we're really trying to hold the space of the community through regular small activities that people can own themselves, and they become the leaders of the work, not the organizations. So I mentioned this a little bit already, but many of you might be familiar with this. Is the ecological model, and we really use it as a tool. So it's kind of a theoretical idea about, the influences around women and why they experience violence and risk. And what we've done is kind of flipped it around to help us with prevention, to help communities figure out, and for organizations supporting communities, who can we work with and who are the critical folks within our community to be able to engage. And so you can see from the individual level to the interpersonal level to the community level to the societal level, we can't work with everybody, but we can work with a lot of people, and we can be strategic in our own communities. So for example, if culture leaders are very strong in a community where we're working, that's a group we're really going to tap into. Other places it might be, the local one and only local health center that everybody goes to and everybody depends on. So it just, it depends and changes on the communities, but the idea is to go into program planning and program design with the idea that we're going to try to be as strategic and broad and inclusive as possible. And sometimes this requires partnering with other organizations doing the work in the areas. It doesn't mean that we have to do it all, but trying to really build that critical mass when they're trying to do social norm change is very, very important. So in Kampala, the process was really led by community members, supported by our wonderful partner organization, the Center for Domestic Violence Prevention and Raising Voices, but really led by community members themselves. So in this photo, this is a drama group, and they don't kind of do it in a very wonderful drama conducive environment, but actually just right in communities where people are. They can be in tiny alleyways, people kind of sitting on their, little just stoops or verandas, and really where people are so that it's accessible. So we would do a wide range of activities in neighborhoods themselves. Also regular support and training and mentoring of the community activists. So we have found this to be really critical, that we can't just kind of have a 2-day or 3-day or whatever meeting with folks and a workshop or a training to help people understand these ideas. But this is really a slow process of mentoring and building the skills and building the confidence and helping kind of people feel like they can take this work on themselves. And so it's very regular support. It's not work that you can visit the community every 8 months. It's really day-to-day being in solidarity and standing with community activists as they do their work. As I said, it's really informal person-to-person activism, some large events, but the real change happens in those micro moments where people are engaging with people that they know and acting differently and authentically within their own relationships. And of course, very important in any primary prevention work is support and referrals to community members. So recognizing that even if our focus is community mobilization and primary prevention, we know that there are going to be women experiencing violence and also men who want to change, and people need support and practical referrals when they are going through processes of change. And so it's a really important aspect and principle within even especially primary prevention work, to have those systems and processes available for people. And so some of the strategies, so we work with four different strategies: local activism, media and advocacy, communication material. To one group is not necessarily going to feel like that to another group. And so community members and community activists themselves figure out, okay, this is an issue that's very close to people in my community, in my neighborhood, and I think, you know, the guys at the drinking joint are really going to like the comic more than they're going to like, you know, a film show or whatever that might be, or a drama. And so recognize that we can't reach across the ecological model with all these groups with the same strategy, but we actually need to be quite creative and help people engage on their own terms with some of these ideas. And as I mentioned before, the content evolves with every phase. So some of the learning comes from that. I'll just share some of that. So working in community over time is really important and much more meaningful than one-off or sporadic activities. Sensitive issues that people, if we do it right, I think that it touches people, and it really feels hard and scary and exciting and hopeful for people to start thinking that there could be change in their communities around how people are using their passions, and really make sure that we engage with communities and commit to communities and are with them in solidarity. And that does mean over time, even if that means that we don't necessarily maybe start some of the programming unless we have consistent and regular engagement with them. Again, important to work with a cross-section of the community. I said that a lot, so that's one important one for us. And also that it's essential to involve both women and men, because they both contribute to sustaining social norms. So I think that there's been a lot over the last years around engaging men and working with men. Before that, it was really working with women and empowering women and working with them as a group. And I think now we're slowly evolving to recognize that we really, if we have to change social norms, we have to work with both men and women at the same time intensely. And this doesn't mean that we don't do any single-sex groups. We might do single-sex groups, and actually we encourage single-sex groups because women need that women-only space to unpack and figure out some of these issues. And similarly, so do men. They need that space where they can kind of grapple with it and not have to, you know, be careful and take care. And so it does mean that there can be single-sex groups, but this isn't work that we can do with women for 3 years and then bring men on board. We really have to engage women and men consistently and intensely over time. And then we have to communicate in creative ways that we can't really just, you know, use either the same old ways or the expected or just one approach or one strategy that we might be comfortable with, or community members might think, oh, this is how we've always done it. We really have to push ourselves to be creative and use multiple communication channels, because we've really learned that the more people hear it from different unexpected even places, the deeper it sinks, and the more people cannot kind of really take it and do something with that in their own lives. And that it does require strong organizational capacity. It's a funny thing, because communities are not running it, but organizations are not running it, but they're really essential in holding that space and facilitating and supporting. And it does require strong organizations that have sustained funding, that have a sustained vision, that really commit to communities over time, and commit to communities in a respectful and mutual way, not as, they are not beneficiaries, they are partners, they are people that we are working in solidarity with. And it really requires an organization that is close to communities. And at least here, I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but at least here, there can be a group in Kampala that is working 7 hours up country and goes once a quarter to see that community for 3 days. And it's really, for this kind of work, we think is insufficient and could actually do harm. So really, to have organizational capacity, leadership, and priority in communities where we're doing this sensitive work. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit. I hope you're all doing okay with this recording and it's not feeling too long. I'll talk for about 20 more minutes, and then I will wrap it up. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the SASA study. The SASA study is in, journals and papers, and so I'm not going to talk about the technical nitty-gritty. You can read that elsewhere, but I just talk you through a few of the findings that we felt really excited about as an activist organization. Okay, so the study was in 4 parts. It had 4 components to it. We did a cluster randomized control trial, and what that means is, for those of you who might not be researchers, we certainly were on a very steep learning curve around research, so a lot of this was very new to us. But so a cluster randomized control trial is that we pair communities together, and we make sure that the demographics are similar, and then we kind of do SASA in certain communities, and the other communities, which are called intervention communities, and then there's control communities where no intervention is done at that time. Now we're doing the work in control communities. There's ethical responsibility to kind of do that after the study is over, so we are now there. But that's the cluster randomized control trial, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We did extensive qualitative research with couples, with women, with men, with community leaders, and more of that data and those findings are coming out now. We did very extensive operations research, so this is kind of, not the research angle, but really the programming and the monitoring that we did as an organization to really keep our eyes and ears to what was really happening, and to be very deliberate about trying to understand processes of change in the community and how those unfold. And then we did a costing study, which has actually just come out, and I just realized I haven't done a slide on that, but we did do a costing study, and it was found that SASA is a cost-effective approach, and it costs under $1 a day per activist to implement SASA. Okay, I'm sorry, everybody. I think some of the audio went off, so you've been hearing a strange disembodied voice. I'm really sorry for that. I hope the experience is not too strange and just hard to follow. So I hope that was okay, and you could keep going, and that the audio and video now is somehow fine. So I'm just going to pick up. I was talking about how SASA changed how people think and feel about these issues around violence against women, and importantly, a finding that we are extremely excited about is that SASA actually changed how people behave. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So Importantly, what we found in the SASA communities were levels of physical partner violence against women were 52% lower than in the control communities. So as you can imagine, this was a huge finding for us. We still kind of feel rather emotional, actually, when we talk about it, because it means a lot to us. It means a lot to the work that we've been doing for so many years. As you all know, this work is really hard. It's very hard. It takes a lot of just patience and perseverance and belief that it's okay and that it's going to work and that you are actually, all the efforts are actually helping change situations for women and communities. And so this was a really important finding. And for the first time, we were able to, we've done this work for more than a decade, and for the first time we had a solid number that we could put behind some of the work that we did. For years we would collect case studies and critically important, and we really don't think that those should disappear or that trials should actually eclipse those, but to have some solid studies that actually show reduction in violence against women at the community level is really critically important. So we felt very excited about this finding. Also, women exposed to SASA were 3 times more likely to receive helpful support than women not exposed to SASA. And this was also really important and speaks to the point around secondary prevention, and that, that even when you're doing primary prevention programming, it's really critical to be able to say, that women who are experiencing violence at the time do receive support and their experience and their reality changes. An important finding that we were surprised by, in total honesty, was that SASA was able to reduce levels of sexual concurrency among men. And 27% of men reported multiple sexual partners in SASA communities compared to 45% in control communities. So this is still not a small number, but it is a significant number, actually, and especially when we're working on the linkage between violence against women and HIV, this was an especially important finding for us. And it does talk about and highlight HIV risk behaviors. And many secondary outcomes are more on some of the HIV risk behaviors that now, these are our primary outcomes, but now the secondary outcome data is also, and results are also coming out. So hopefully we'll have more understanding and shed more light on those pieces as well. So that's the research, and that's really important. But then there's also, what does this work mean, and what did we feel good about? Of course, we felt good about the findings, and we feel very excited that communities were able to do that. And they felt extremely excited, and I think that that was one of the biggest joys of the study, actually, was that people just really felt so proud, and they really took ownership of that work through the kind of long, hard kind of moments of it, as well as this big celebration when the results did come and people were able to say, actually, I've been doing this work in my community for several years, and here's what we were able to achieve. And it was a really wonderful, wonderful moment. We also found in our finding, again, as we unpack more of the data, that there are multiple impacts around the economic development of families, parents, relationship with children, children witnessing intimate partner violence, and people's activism. So this feeling of not just I do violence work and that's sort of, what I do, but people are getting engaged. They're getting engaged in other issues around water and sanitation and political life, and are having this new sense of activism within their own lives. And for us, that was a huge hope, and we are really seeing that, and that's incredibly encouraging because we really believe that, that life is happening within this context, and it's not a single focus issue, but that actually once people start to feel more engaged and have more agency themselves, that a whole range of options open up to people and communities. Another really important achievement was that activism was sustained beyond the project time frame, so that, you know, okay, we stopped the work, you know, technically for the study, and that was that. But then once the study was over, and, you know, communities understood that, and we had explained that to people. But then, of course, when the study was over and the surveys were done and we could go back and just be with people again, you know, things have kept going. Like, people are really still engaged, and people's identities have shifted as a result of it. That, you know, women will say, well, I'm Mama Sasa in my community, and people know me as that. Or, you know, that I used to be nobody, but now, you know, look at, there's people waiting on my bench outside my door every day to talk to me about personal issues. And in a space where people have very few opportunities for any sort of kind of social standing or status, because all of the kind of key pieces around having money or education or a good job aren't really available from very many people. And so having something that kind of feeds their own identity has been really, really important. So always challenges, but really important. And some of the learnings for us were, and continue to be, this is not like you learn it and then you go on and it never becomes an issue anymore. It's a constant challenge, I think, around trusting the process and trusting people, and knowing that when community organizing is being done, it's not linear, it's not neat, it's very messy. So it's like many things going on at the same time, and a lot of them don't quite sound as you would wish they would sound. But accepting that and knowing that that's actually how people change. They don't change through slick kind of you know, pieces from the outside. It's in those moments where people are grappling and articulating and debating and discussing and trying and failing and trying and succeeding that actually change happens. And that's messy. It's not an easy, simple, like, here we go, this is so neat and very clear. It's not. It requires really engaging and staying sustained in that engagement and staying positive, so that, you know, if you go out with a community activist and you see, you know, again, the discussion veers off here, or, you know, all sorts of issues pop up, that part of the importance of this work is holding that space and holding the activism and the effort and the risk that people are taking, because this is risky, right? That people are going and talking about these issues in their communities where many people, most at the beginning, are very, you know, if not hesitant to even listen, outright kind of against what they're kind of talking about. And so it takes so much courage and so much risk at a personal level as well as at a community level for people to do this. And if we, as people supporting this work, can stay positive and creative and supportive within that process, really, really important. Okay, so just some learnings at a broader kind of programmatic level. What's working? Yeah, one of the things that Nicola and the group had sent through is really tell us, like, what worked, what do you think? And I've been talking a lot about many of those things, but just to kind of hone them down a little bit more. This is community-led activism. It is not organization-led. I don't know if that's a big issue in New Zealand where you are, but in our region, it's not the norm, and that it's really challenging for organizations. It's challenging for communities to kind of change that mindset that people actually can and should be leading this work themselves. It takes a lot of trust, and I think that that's really important and key in the success that we can have mobilizing communities. The other is a focus on critical consciousness, so not messaging, not going through and saying, this is what you should believe, or here's information for you and statistics. That kind of stays within the realm of the head, and what we really have to do if we're going to change long-term, you know, deeply held issues, we have to focus on getting personal with people and helping people think through themselves what this means for their own lives so they can make a change, because that's when it's going to be sustainable, and that's when it's going to be able to continue those changes that people can make if they've really gone through a personal reflection and analysis on these issues. And materials and activities can support this and actually facilitate this by asking questions, by really helping people reflect instead of kind of giving simple solutions or simple slogan-y messages, which, you know, we have found don't really resonate to people in the long term or at a deep level. And that, you know, we have to, you know, this is violence against women work. People need hope to change. Hope is critical. And if our programs are not helping people aspire to something different, but are kind of just focusing on what is wrong and what isn't working, that is a real kind of a barrier to real change. That if we can help people understand and recognize the benefits of this and help them feel like, okay, I can do this and my life will be better for it, then that is a hook, and a really, really important hook. And that everything, well, we have to talk about difficult issues and we can't overlook that, and we have to hold men accountable for using violence against women. We don't have to kind of condemn them as perpetrators, right? That they're just who are using their power in a very negative way. But there's hope. They can change that. There's possibilities. Yeah. Working with men and women together, that we have to move beyond silos, that we work with women here, we work with men here, that we really work with men and women together, sometimes in single-sex groups, sometimes in mixed groups, but that if we're doing social norm change, we have to think collectively about both men and women, and not just at the individual level, but across the ecological model. And use the language of power. For us, it's been really compelling. It's interesting right now, we're seeing it work in different communities that, you know, are very different than Kampala, from refugee settings to rural places across the region to pastoralist communities, and that seems for us anyway, and it'll be really interesting to see any learning from other folks using it in different regions, is like it really is resonating for people. It's provocative. It's new sounding, it's personal, and it has really helped kind of push over some boundaries for us. And then, of course, what's not working. There's lots of micro issues that aren't working, but I thought I'd stay big picture. So one of them that's really interesting for us is that, you know, at the beginning, we really emphasize, like many gender transformative approaches and violence prevention approaches do, just a focus on more equity within household gender roles. So if women do this and men do more of this, and if there's more parity within sharing between partners, that will then kind of eventually result in better relationships and more balanced power between women and men. But what we found is quite different to that, and as we were listening and really trying to understand as the program was unfolding, people, you know, were telling us, like, this is creating a lot of tension for me. This is really, we're in like an adversarial place with each other, and partners aren't connecting. It was really, people felt that it was really causing tensions between folks, and that people were starting to go very nitty-gritty and kind of bickering on small things. And not that sharing gender roles is a small thing, it's a really important piece. But what we did is kind of shift that and reframe that into talking about, people would say, I want him to take the milk that's over boiling and boiling over off the fire when he sees it, because, you know, I'm breastfeeding the baby. Like, I want him to do that because he cares about me and he wants to help me and he sees that we're in this together. And, you know, she didn't want him to do that because it was his turn to do that. But it was like more of people are really talking about how, you know, what matters in a relationship is feeling respected and cared for and loved, and rather than kind of this, you know, tit for tat, I do this, you do that. And so when we shifted that discourse and we talked about gender roles, but we talked about them within the context of supportive and respectful and mutual relationships, that really changed things for us, as opposed to just focusing on like who does what and who does the dishes. So that was a really important learning, and we're just actually trying to understand that and unpack that a little bit more. Also, the inclusion of different types of violence against women was too overwhelming. So SASA, as is published, is violence against women and HIV, preventing both. And what we found actually is that violence against women frame is very big and very broad, and it was quite hard for people. And so what we found is that actually focusing on intimate partner violence helped bring the issue closer to people, because even if I'm not in an intimate relationship, I've witnessed intimate relationships probably too closely, right? As children, we all witness our parents or some guardians, intimate partners, intimate partnerships, and that was something that, you know, people can connect to immediately and make small changes in a meaningful and personal way. Whereas if we're talking about FGM and early marriage and bride price and stranger rape, it felt so overwhelming to people and so big and oftentimes so far away that it wasn't gaining traction. And so we did again hone in on intimate partner violence, and that was a really important learning for us. So just, SASA is being used in certainly in the control communities, and the original SASA communities are now supporting the communities, the second communities, and there's lots of really nice exchange going on there. Many folks are using it across the region, from really small CBOs to large INGOs in very diverse settings. So we're trying to learn and be systematic around learning what that means to do it if it's in pastoral communities compared to IDP camps, for example. We're also trying to figure out what it means to have, this idea of scale is a very big one, at least in our region. And, the idea with scale is, okay, give it to government and see what they can do. We're doing a mini kind of pilot around that, and it's being used by the government in Uganda in the 8 districts in Busoga region, and we're really learning. It's still very, very up in the air, and we're learning about what that means. And there are adaptations underway. So a major adaptation is fully completed in Haiti. It's all on the web. We're doing also one in Ethiopia and for faith-based communities. Okay, so just a few minutes left. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about so what? So what does this mean for prevention? And to spend a few minutes on that. So the big question is, everyone says, okay, so should we just do SASA? And we think that, no, you shouldn't just do SASA, actually, that, we can all learn, and we should be learning more from each other, but actually, we must actually continue to innovate and figure out what works together. So one of the things that we've really learned is being systematic and structured. So not jumping in. So there's certain things to adopt, yeah? And to say, yes, this is really important. And I think, across violence prevention programming, no matter where it is, in a very high-income country or a lower-income country or in the global north or south, being systematic and structured is really important, especially for long-term, holistic, comprehensive approaches like community mobilization that tend to have a lot of moving parts in. This helps organizations and communities stay the course, and actually all the work that they're doing add up to something. Also, really critically, to move beyond awareness raising. That just awareness raising, we've learned, through the field of violence prevention and the public health field, that raising awareness and having knowledge and even an attitude change isn't enough. That we have to build skills and we have to support people to take action and maintain those actions. So that should be built into all sorts of violence prevention programming, no matter where it is. Also, focusing on the root is more effective, we feel, than focusing on the manifestations. Very unfortunately, there are a myriad of manifestations, and no program can ever try to address and deal with all of the manifestations of violence. But we can actually focus on some of the root issues. And if we focus on the root, what we're finding is, even if we're focusing on the root and we're thinking about IPV, for example, in some of the SASA communities, early marriage, for example, is really rising to the top in some communities, and communities then take that on as their own thing, because that's where the imbalance of power is emerging for them. So different groups will have different issues emerge, but focusing on the core helps make sure that we're really getting at the core and not just at the sort of the leaves on a tree. Build on community assets. So, you know, I mentioned very briefly the start phase, and many programs start with a needs assessment or a problem, a problem frame and a problem tree. And, we are really encouraging groups to move into really focusing on the strengths and the assets of a community. We know violence is happening. Violence happens across the world. We don't need necessarily, we need to understand the risk and protective factors around violence against women in certain communities, but we don't have to over-focus on all of what the community doesn't have. The community has a lot, and programs that recognize that, capitalize on that, and build on that can get further into their own programming. Context, culture, and language matter. Like, we can't just be dropping programs from other places and other contexts with other languages and just hoping that they land. We really have to be critical and really recognizing that context is critical. How people are in their own communities matters a lot. And if the more programs are contextualized and local, the stronger they will be. It doesn't mean that they can't have broader components that they share with other programs, but the context in which and how we start to implement programs really, really matters. So does culture, and so does language. Culture, for example, is a really critical thing, and I think one of the questions came through from the Symposium Steering Committee is that, we don't really talk about, when we start our programming, we don't talk about culture and violence. We don't make that link because culture is so big. Culture is everything. We build on the strengths of a culture, like the Sengas, for example, in Kampala, the traditional marriage counselors. In Ethiopia, they're really capitalizing on the coffee ceremonies, and using those in the service of violence prevention rather than saying, okay, our program is about to change culture. People feel very intense and protective about their cultures. And to start by saying we're going to change culture, we have found can be a really hard go and doesn't help bring people on board. And of course, language in local languages, but also framing and tone really matter. Honoring process. I know that this is harder and harder given the bigger development paradigm that's underway, but really recognizing that good programming does take time, and we have to recognize that we can't know at the outset of a program what's going to happen in, quarter 15 of that program. We have to really recognize and honor process and be okay if we're deliberate around paying attention to the direct or indirect consequences of programming, but honoring that process and holding that process through till the end. And listening. We could all listen a lot more. We learned a lot. We thought we were listening better than we were at the beginning of SASA, and we realized, and then we just kind of kept going and going, and we really had to, because you want to get going, and we knew that we had limited time because of the study. We had to really take it down and slow it down and listen, really, really listen to people and hear what people were saying, even if it wasn't convenient, even if it wasn't what we wanted to hear, but really listen to how people are and what's happening within people to make our programming better. And consider the principles of prevention. I've been talking a lot about many of the principles around being strengths-based and working across the ecological model and all sorts of principles. But now, as a field, we do have more learning on that. And one of them is, we documented, myself and some other activists have been working on violence prevention for many years. We're invited to contribute to the special issue on violence against women within the Lancet. And this is up free and on the web. But one of the things is to try to say, not just from our own experience of SASA, but here is an evidence and practice informed model of principles of, so no matter where you are, no matter what your program looks like, are there key components that we know from practice and evidence that actually those components or those principles really matter? Because if we start to delineate those for each other and for ourselves, then no matter where we are and what kind of programming we're doing, we can have these critical aspects that really help make prevention more effective. So just finally, really, as you go on in your work in New Zealand and through this day of discussing things at this really important symposium, you know, just a few final thoughts that I would leave is to really try to keep innovating. I know that the field is pushing evidence-based approaches, and I think as a field we need to push back a little bit on that and say, yes, we need evidence, but we also need space to create. We don't know all the answers yet, and sometimes when I hear the approach has to be, you know, results-based and evidence-based before we even start, how is that possible? We need to try to build and have theory and evidence-informed approaches, but if we only say only evidence-based approaches should be implemented, we're going to lose the innovation and we're going to lose the capacity to innovate, which is really critical. The field is at a very young stage right now, and we all need to be innovating and learning and sharing. So documenting your programs. You're doing a program, document it. Very simply even, just write about it. Build in learning from the start. So don't wait until 3 years down the line and then try to retrospectively say what happened. Try to build in learning. It doesn't have to be a trial, but work through and figure out how it can be effective kind of monitoring and learning along the way. And a hard one is share the good and also share the bad. Like, we make mistakes, we're totally learning. That's good, actually, and legitimate, and we should have space and support ourselves, and we should support each other to share. This is what we felt really excited about it and we did well, and this is what we actually did not do well at all, and this is what we learned for it, and this is why it matters for the field. Of course, writing up and disseminating learning is really critical. I mean, you know, we're often very spread. I mean, how often are we going to get to New Zealand, and how often are you going to be able to get to East Africa and South Africa and Latin America? So really, we have to have the discipline as activists, which is not easy at all, to be able to write up and disseminate our learning. So we have to, again, try to create the space for that ourselves. Connect with others like we're doing now, and consider the broader field. I know that sometimes it just feels like, okay, here's my world and this is what I'm doing and I should stay really focused on this and be local. It's true, but also we are then missing the broader field, and the broader community misses those contributions. And so, you know, just try to keep an eye toward remembering the broader field, and that contribution, small, big, good, bad, is really important. And the more that we're connected and we share that with each other, the more collectively we can push the field of violence prevention forward. So thank you very much. Thank you for the patience with this new technology that clearly has lots of hiccups, and I'm sorry for that. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day together. I hope someday I will be able to visit in New Zealand and see some of the amazing work there that I've just read about. The heart movement really inspired me a few months ago when I was at a meeting in Germany, and I think we just have so much to share collectively. So I really appreciate you inviting me to be part of this process, and I really encourage you to reach out, stay in touch, and let's together really try to figure out how to make women's lives safer. So thank you very much, and you're all most welcome to Kampala anytime, and have a really good rest of the day. Thanks.